Welcome, dear friends, to another episode of the Leading with Empathy podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Murray, and I'm really excited to have you with me once again. And today we're going to explore a topic that someone had written to me about. They'd seen some of my content, some of my posts, some of the other episodes, and they reached out to ask, what about narcissists? Now, this is a common question I get because when you talk about empathy, you often run into the fact that there are people in our society who don't seem to have any empathy or any ability or capacity for it. So, I wanted to unpack, what do you do if you're working with a narcissist? How do you spot a narcissist? What are some of the things that might be you might see or experience around these types of people? And then I want to give you some ideas on ways to manage, to deal, to also create the environment where you might be able to reduce the impact of some of those types of behaviors. So let's dive into it. This is all about managing narcissism with empathy. The first thing I think it's important for us to do is just be really clear on what we mean when we say someone is a narcissist. So, narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, which is the more clinical definition, is something that can be diagnosed and looked at from that perspective. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into what are the types of things that lead to a diagnosis, but I want to just clarify something that from most studies, the suggestion is that about, well, less than 5% of the population have narcissistic personality disorder. So these are people who, for whatever reason in their brain chemistry and structure, don't have the capacity or don't seem to express the capacity for things like empathy, consideration for others. They do have that sense of self-centeredness. Less than 5% in the global population studies. So we need to understand that this isn't something that's common. They shouldn't be everywhere. And that you will run into some, but it's not always all that common. What's far more common is everyday people, anyone really, with the ability to display narcissistic behaviors. And so I want to focus on those narcissistic behaviors. Now, again, this is something that there's a lot of work and a lot of research done. What you'll often see in these narcissistic behaviors are things like people with an unreasonably high sense of self-importance. They really need admiration. They need other people to care about them. They'll often seem to have this sense of privilege, that they deserve special treatment, that others should see them in some sort of lifted or a higher sense than everyone else. That sense that even without achievements, they should be recognized. They should be seen as being great for just turning up and for you being able to bask in their presence. They often look at their own achievements and make them seem much bigger than they are, make them seem overinflated, which again, this isn't an unfamiliar behavior in lots of people, is it? It's the old fisherman's tale, or how big was the fish that got away? So this is something that's not uncommon, but often in that narcissistic space, it can be done quite frequently. There's often people who have these fantasies of success. You'll see this a lot in the modern this modern culture of entrepreneurialism and hustle culture, where people talk about their successes and how wonderful they are, and they show off their wares. And again, this can be seen as a narcissistic type of behavior. People who believe they are superior to others, that they deserve special standards or special treatment. They look down on others who they see as less important. This is where it starts to get more, I guess, pointed in terms of work environment as well. That they tend to take advantage of others. They often use others to get what they want. They'll find ways to manipulate the system to benefit themselves. They'll often have an unwillingness or inability to reach out, help, support, or even care about others. And this is again something that is quite common. You can hear people say things like, "Well, I don't care how it feels. I don't care what that means to you. This is just the way it is." There's often a sense of arrogance that goes along with this narcissistic behavior, and they tend to want more for them and the best for them. They have to have the best of everything, and it's unreasonable that they shouldn't get it. So you might have seen these behaviors. You might have seen them in the workplace. You might have seen them on television. The classic Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. It shows perfect narcissistic behavior and displays it quite regularly. So while there is a small percentage who have a disorder in this space, a lot of people can display narcissistic behaviors in the right environments and under the right circumstances. And this is where, as leaders, we need to be very conscious, very aware, and be taking action. So a few things to consider when you might be thinking you've got narcissistic behaviors emerging in your environment, in your team, in your workplace. The first thing to be very careful of is, have you been clear on what the standards of behavior are, and are you upholding those standards? Now, I know this seems really simple in some senses, but what we tend to do when it comes to behavior and conduct standards is we tend to have somewhere hidden away in a HR archive a really strong code of conduct document that no one's ever read, or very few people read. If you've read it, you probably haven't checked it regularly, you probably haven't gone back over it, and for many organizations, it either doesn't exist or it may as well not exist because it's not something that's usable. It's something that's regulatorily important, and it's nice to have, but that's not going to help you as a leader in terms of supporting those standards of behavior in your team. What you really need to do as a leader is take that code of conduct and unpack it. I would often recommend working with a HR professional in your organization to do this. Unpack it from the perspective of, what does this mean for the specific actions and behaviors which are common in my team? What does this mean for the ways in which my team need to behave and work together in our very specific types of activity that we do? And often what happens when you go through this process is you'll find that there are some gaps. There are some places that the code of conduct doesn't cover, and that you need to add some more context, some more specificity to make sure that the standards that you set for your team are very clear and aligned with what we're trying to do inside the organization. And of course, in smaller organizations, you might want to set your own standards, create your own code of conduct, if you like. But it's not good enough to just have a document. The documents don't help. What helps is us constantly monitoring the behaviors, supporting the behaviors with both feedback, positive feedback, and corrective feedback where it's needed. And so this is where, if you go back to our first episode in the podcast series around how do you give good feedback, we need to get good at finding these times when the narcissistic or other poor behaviors are increasing or emerging, and being able to have those tough conversations immediately. Going through that process of describing what was the objective behavior that you're pushing back against. Now, this is a really good case of where that objective behavior part of the feedback model is so important. Because if I said to someone, hey, I noticed you're being a narcissist, there's a really good chance they won't agree with you. I mean, and in the definition of the narcissistic personality we just talked about, that is an attack on their ego. That is a challenge to their grandeur. It is, if nothing else, it has a derogatory undertone that they will reject. We can't say, hey, stop being a narcissist. It won't work. It won't be accepted, it won't be recognized, and you're likely to find yourself in a whole world of challenges down that path. So what we need to get clear on again is, what are the specific objective behaviors that you're seeing? Now, if we were to say, hey, I noticed that you took this action or made this decision which benefited you, but it was really bad for the rest of the team. And as much as I can get really clear on that objective behavior, I can then start to have a conversation around this particular action and behavior. and ways in which that particular action and behavior are causing damage or impact or negativity for others in the team, and a corrective way in which we need to address that. So it's really, really important that we don't rush to label someone a narcissist. Instead, as leaders, we focus in on what are those specific objective behaviors that are creating the issues that we're talking about. And this is where, if you've got a good standard of behaviors, if you've got a good sense of what those behavioral commitments are in your team, then you can point to say, well, this is the behavior I saw, and this is the standard we have, and you can see clearly, let's talk through it. There's a gap here that we need to address. Remember, you can't hold people to standards that they don't know. And people who have a more narcissistic tendency will very often find that if it's not clear and you create a little loophole or a little way in which they can justify themselves or find a way to blame others or to feel bullied or to feel like their brilliance isn't being recognized, they will absolutely jump on it. This is a pretty natural and obvious thing to think about, isn't it? So as much as we can, again, focus in on those objective behaviors and let's get good at giving strong, hard feedback. This feedback won't always be liked, it won't always be accepted straight away. And this is why when we go back to episode 1, there are processes you may need to follow in terms of supporting this person to exit the organization. And once again, I've seen this many times before. Someone who overly displays narcissistic behaviors doesn't really want to or won't change their behaviors. They're exited from the organization, and often as they're leaving, there are cheers and sighs of relief from the rest of the team, because these behaviors can be a toxic force that really sucks the energy out of your organization. So as much as we can, we need to be on the front foot as leaders, looking for, seeing these behaviors and making sure we're giving strong, direct feedback on those behaviors as soon as we can. Now, what you'll often find is people with more narcissistic tendencies will have more excuses, they'll have more reasons why it wasn't their fault, they'll have more ways of justifying, and this is where as leaders we need to be very firm, we need to be very clear and objective. We need to make sure that we understand their emotions, we understand our emotions and the emotions of everyone else in the team to fill this space and make sure that we're having a good objective look at what's going on. And really, one thing to be absolutely focused on here is if someone is displaying these narcissistic behaviors disproportionately to everyone else in the team, if they're further down this spectrum of narcissism, if we'd like to call it that, than others, and they aren't able to or won't move back towards where the rest of the team are, then we have to be able to part ways with them. We have to be able to go through, have a good feedback, good evidence for that feedback, good documentation for the types of behaviors, and good communication of our standards, so we can absolutely have a very strong basis from which to say, here is the behaviors we set as we saw against the standards that we'd set. Here are when it was communicated. Here are all the instances and times in which we've given the feedback. We've set plans that haven't been followed through, and therefore it's a very strong case for us to say we need to exit this person from the organization. Not good, not fun, not lovely, but very, very important when we have these people in our organization that we take appropriate action. Sometimes another thing we have to be very conscious of is that some people who are displaying these types of behaviors will be very cautious around you. If you're the leader, if you're a person in a position of authority, they may appear to you to be absolutely squeaky clean, acting perfectly and doing nothing wrong. You'll often get reports, though, from others in the team around the types of behaviors that are creating some chaos or disruption or tension in the team. My advice here, and it's very similar to I've spoken about this before many times to many corporate audiences, when you hear reports of something going on, get curious and get close. Try as best as you can to see or experience the behavior yourself. Sometimes confronting a narcissist or someone who's very clever and skilled at getting through or dodging some of these things will only set a bit of a trap for yourself. You have a conversation, they deny it, they play the victim, they find ways to blame others for this, or they start to gaslight. There's a whole bunch of things you can often see when you have a conversation with someone when you've only got a sort of scrap of gossip or secondhand information. As best you can, get curious and get close. Try and observe the types of behaviors that are being reported and understand what's really going on. Where we can sometimes go wrong here as leaders is we hear something, and so we swan in just for a few minutes to have a look around. Now, a bit like when someone comes to your house to visit, for example, or if you're a renter, maybe you've got a rental inspection coming, what do? You tidy up and you make it look great. Only for a while. Once they leave, then it can go back to its natural state. And sometimes the narcissist will do this as well. You'll come along, you'll have a look around, and they will paint themselves to be rosy and clean. They'll paint themselves to really be the pinnacle of what's going on here, and the people around you will see them doing this. They'll get frustrated, they'll get annoyed, and that frustration and annoyance can bubble, and then the narcissist can point to them and say, see, that's where the real problem is. Be very careful how you handle these situations. Get curious, get close. Spend time trying to understand what's really going on in your team. It's a vital part of leadership. The next thing I just want to touch on is sometimes narcissists are the things that we breed. We grow them. We help them to blossom. We help them to flower. We support them with the types of systems and processes that we build around these people. Now, I know this is again something that we often don't talk enough about. But if you have systems and processes, particularly things like reward systems in your organization that give people rewards for certain outcomes and ignore their behaviors, you are going to create a perfect environment, a petri dish for these narcissistic behaviors to fester. If you weren't sure about how this plays out, please go and have a look at the Banking Royal Commission around some of the findings of the behavior that we saw there. Terrible behaviors that got good results. And this is something that's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. If you are building systems that reward outcomes and ignore behaviors, people will find bad behaviors will get them the outcomes they need easier than the tough, good behaviors. And when they completely ignore all of the behaviors and just do those things to get the outcome, they'll often find themselves in a position where they are displaying some of this narcissistic behavior themselves. For example, if you have a team with multiple sales representatives working to try and enter a marketplace and sell products. Let's say we were selling cleaning products, so we know that almost all stores and food preparation, they all need cleaning products. So there's so many potential customers out there. And what we say to our sales staff is, okay, go for it. What you can do is build yourself a little bank of customers that you've flagged that you're going to go after, and you'll put those in a database and make sure no one else, we don't want everyone doubling up, right? So if someone's already tagged that company, they'll go and talk to them, and we'll make sure that everyone's going out, we're finding new potential targets, new prospects, and then we're managing them through a sales pipeline. That all sounds pretty standard and normal, doesn't it? So what's stopping, one of our salespeople just flagging 50 or 60% of all the potential prospects? Just going into the system saying, oh no, I'm going to manage all of these. I'll put my name beside all of these ones, or even I'll go and find all of the most likely or the largest potentials, and I'm going to flag all of those as mine. Now, if I've got a team of 10, and one of my people go out and flag 50% of them, it does a few things, doesn't it? One is it makes it incredibly hard for everyone else to fight my other 9 people fighting over the other 50%, which are potentially the smaller cohort of prospects. It also makes it easier for my number one person here, who's got the 50%, to go out and write as much business and become the number one salesperson. Now, the system that we've built and the processes that we've built here allow that to take place. And suddenly what can happen is my people get far more interested in how do I prospect and get a big list of potentials than actually going out talking to, servicing and selling to those clients. Again, a narcissist will find these ways to advantage themselves, and they won't care about whether it's fair to others or not. Now, fairness is one of those things. We've spoken about it before. It's incredibly important. When we trigger the sense of unfair, a lot of things can go on in teams. And what I've seen happen many times, you might have seen this as well, is when a good person encounters a narcissist for long enough, they'll do bad behaviors, or they'll enact terrible behaviors at times to get back at that person, to make it fair. Now, that doesn't mean that these are bad people. It means that they are natural human beings who have felt this sense of injustice, and they will absolutely not stand for it. And so therefore, they'll find a way to fight back. Now, if you want to see what this sense of unfairness looks like in other animals, there's a great video. If you just type in monkey fairness experiment into YouTube, you'll see a really great example of how fairness can absolutely cause this within us. And this is one of the biggest challenges that happens when you work with a narcissist. They create spaces where things aren't fair. And when you trigger that sense of unfairness, when you trigger a sense of injustice, and when you have a system or a process which is reinforcing that sense of unfairness, that's institutionalizing this sense of injustice, people can do incredibly bad things. We see this globally, and I won't get political about this, but we see this globally in the world. When there is institutionalized sense of injustice, it can send absolute chaos throughout a whole organization, team, or even country. So my big thing here with as a leader, when you're thinking about these narcissistic behaviors, is making sure that you're observing them. You're looking for the behaviors, not labeling the person too quickly. Look for the behaviors and give feedback on the behaviors. Set those standards of conduct, the standards of behavior, and be very clear and constant in the description of what they are, why they're important, how you're going to uphold them, and what they look like in practice in our environment. Give lots of feedback. Give lots of feedback. Make sure it's objective about the behaviors, and it's very specific and targeted around those certain behaviors. And you really want to make sure that even if there are excuses and other things going on, that you're getting absolutely clear feedback being given around the behaviors that are acceptable and the ones that are unacceptable in your team. If you're hearing about narcissistic behavior but not seeing it yourself, get curious and get close. Spend time in the environment where it's occurring. Spend time looking for it. Invest in understanding what's really going on in your team, and be careful not to spook too early the narcissist into a range of behaviors to try and justify and get out of any of those criticisms that might come their way. They're very good at being the slippery fish and getting away from some of the criticism that might come. And then look at the systems and processes in your team. Are there elements of the systems and processes in your organizations and around your team that are creating an environment where obviously narcissism is an optimal way of going forward? In many games, cheating and doing the wrong thing can get you ahead. Make sure that your organization doesn't have these little games sitting in amongst the rest of your business, because when they are there and people exploit them, everyone else will feel that sense of injustice, and either they'll need to exploit them as well to compete, or they'll absolutely find ways to fight back against it and undoubtedly they'll be negative in terms of the overall consequences and outcomes for your team. The final point I just want to finish on, and again, this comes up quite regularly, is what happens if I'm working for a narcissist? What happens if I'm working for someone who shows all of these narcissistic behaviors? This is much, much more challenging. So let me just say 2 quick points around what happens if you're working for a narcissist. The first point is, if possible, talk to the manager of the narcissist boss, talk to your boss once removed, and their peers. Build relationships up and across your organization, because if this person is the only one and there aren't the similar behaviors being perpetuated around there, then this might be a bad apple within your organization. There might be other things going on. And again, the behaviors of this person up and across might look vastly different. They might not see or observe those narcissistic behaviors at play. And so being able to talk up and across might give some more information for more feedback and some of those course corrections we talked about for those leaders at the levels above where you are. The other thing I would say is, if in doing that, in talking up and across, you find that there's a lot of those behaviors, or people think those behaviors are totally acceptable and there's nothing wrong with those behaviors, or you find that people are encouraging this person and think this person's doing a great job and don't know what you're complaining about. If you find yourself in that position, my number one piece of advice is you're in the wrong job. You're working for the wrong person in the wrong organization. And my heartfelt advice would be start to look for ways to move out of that organization. Because one thing I can guarantee you is, if you stay, you will absorb some of those narcissistic behaviors. You'll start to take on some of those cultural norms, and we don't need more narcissistic behavior in the world, just particularly not from good people like you. So there we have it, narcissism. How do you manage a narcissistic behavior with empathy? It's not easy, it's very challenging, but making sure that we set the standards, making sure we're giving feedback, making sure that we're observing and understanding and curious about the behaviors, and then exploring the way our systems and processes might be exacerbating the problem. All really important steps to take when we're managing and leading people who are displaying this narcissistic behavior. I hope that was really helpful. I'd love any more questions in the comments below. Reach out to me through LinkedIn or Facebook, or send a carrier pigeon if you need. But I'm always here to hear your questions, and I look forward to seeing you on another episode of Leading with Empathy. Take care.